Joining me now is best-selling author of groundbreaking works including The Strange Death of Europe, The Madness of Crowds and The War on the West, Douglas Murray. We will get to Victoria's new pill testing policy and more permissive attitude to illicit drugs shortly, but let's start in New York, where the stench of marijuana is often lingering in the air, and it's in New York's 16th district that the far left suffered a blow. The squad is one member down after Jamal Bowman lost his primary race by quite a margin. This is despite AOC's best efforts over the weekend to whip up support in the Bronx. And it didn't take long for the New York Times to blame, you guessed it, the Jews. It was a flood of pro-Israel money that did it. But after a backlash on X and questions from the New York Post, the Times did alter its headline. But we should not be surprised, Douglas, that the first instinct of the New York Times is to blame Israel, blame the Jews.
Yeah, I think that the reason why Jamal Bowman lost was because he was a hideous representative. His district seems to think he should talk about foreign affairs in a far-off country about which he knows nothing, rather than doing anything for the people of his district. And I think another reason he lost was because of the sort of scenes we're seeing there. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez seemed to think, when she was trying to rally up the Bronx to a really small number of people the other day, seemed to think she was some kind of Taylor Swift, maybe bigger than Taylor Swift, jumping around the stage, doing these kind of embarrassing hand gestures, undoing her hair, redoing it, flipping it around, showing just how down with the kids she is, whilst talking about the importance of a ceasefire in the Middle East. These people are an embarrassment to their districts, and they're an embarrassment to most New Yorkers. Most New Yorkers, like other voters, want things close to home to be addressed. Some of them have a care about foreign policy, for sure, but congressmen and women, they don't have any say. It's not important. This isn't their area. And they're meant to, as I say, improve the living standards of their area. All you hear from people like former Representative Bowman and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the sort of basic sort of soapbox demagoguery, complete inability to do anything meaningful. When Jamal Bowman, when a vote was going the wrong way, he decided to run into the corridors and pull the fire alarm. Like some crazy delinquent. And, maybe it's things like that that actually meant that people voted him out. But of course, of course, he thinks it's the Jews, of course.
Well, always. And talking about the issues that actually matter to Americans, we're mere hours away from the much-awaited presidential debate, and the issues that matter most to Americans are illegal immigration, we've got the cost of living crisis, we've got crime. But I wonder, Douglas, is a debate that's going to be moderated by two CNN hosts going to focus on those issues, or are they going to provide questions that are more palatable to Joe Biden?
Well, it's going to be an extraordinary debate by any standards. Several reasons, by the way. As far as I know, this is the first time there has been such a debate ahead of the party's conventions. So it's especially risky, in my view, for Joe Biden, who finds it hard to perform well on the easiest of days. This is going to be a tough one for him. I hope that if we learn anything from it, we will actually get on to the substantive issues. There are major disagreements between the candidates. Donald Trump obviously campaigned in both his previous runs and is in this one on the border crisis. Joe Biden has let the border crisis in America just absolutely explode. Americans can see things like that manifesting in their cities. They can see the results of crime and massively liberalized drug laws in their cities. I think one of the toughest ones, Rita, to look out for is, will the candidates be able to have a substantial conversation about the cost of living crisis, which you just referred to, and the question of inflation, because inflation, to my mind, is an especially interesting one. It seems abstract in a way, and it seems abstract when politicians discuss it, but it's not abstract because the rampant inflation of recent years has meant that everybody's grocery bills, you get less, sometimes literally less than you did a few years ago for the same product. The product is much more expensive. Are either of the candidates going to be able to explain that one and say what they will do to get that under control? I think that's one of the things to look out for in this debate, as well, of course, as the basic ones, such as, will Donald Trump allow Joe Biden to speak, and can Joe Biden speak? Those are the two other things to look out for.
I think they're going to prep him to within an inch of his life. I think we're going to see a Joe Biden that's more lucid and sharp than we have seen him for some time. He seems to get himself up for some of these big events like the State of the Union, and there's been suggestions made that perhaps there should be some drug testing before this debate. I think there was a poll done showing 70% of Americans actually want the candidates to undergo a drug test before the debate. So that's where we're at. That's where we're at. Now, it's been a while since we talked about Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the neo-Marxist Ken doll, as I call him. He's in some serious trouble, Douglas. This week, his party lost a by-election in one of the safest Liberal seats in the country, in Toronto, St. Paul. And Trudeau's minority government is badly trailing the Conservatives in the polls. Is this the end for Trudeau, Douglas? Have the Canadian people finally woken up to the performative caring that lacks any real substance?
You absolutely put your finger on it, Rita. Performative caring. That's all that Justin Trudeau does. It's very hard to find a true thing he's ever said or a sincere thing he's ever said. The man is entirely artifice. He's an utter bimbo, a phrase that maybe one wouldn't use of a female politician these days, but I'm happy to use of Justin Trudeau. He's so grotesquely... He's a himbo, I suppose. I was in Canada last week in a couple of cities, and I can't tell you, Rita, the detestation that you find for Trudeau across the political board. A vast majority of Canadians want him to stand down now. He has really impressive opposition now. I think that Pierre Poilievre and the others on the Conservative side that are coming along, they're very impressive people are now facing off against Trudeau. I think he's absolutely toast because finally, we've got to that stage where being a sort of superannuated drama teacher, turns out you can fool some people for a little while, but not for all that long. Everyone in Canada who wants to see through Justin Trudeau has seen through him. I don't think anyone will regret finally seeing the back of him.
He was the biggest media darling in the world there for quite some time, though, Douglas. He had a very long honeymoon indeed. Him and Jacinda Ardern and you beautifully described them with that tag of performative caring, because that's what it was. It was all style, no substance. You look at the policies they instituted, they weren't helping people, but they were fated as these new age leaders who were full of compassion and empathy. But yeah, there's not much of that.
It's interesting, Rita, isn't it? And people should be aware of this. The amount you can get away with that is cruel and sometimes evil if you wrap it up in this particular style of politics. As long as you come across all lovey and sort of, silken haired, whether it's Ardern or Trudeau, you can do the most vicious things to your public. And wow, did they do it.
Oh, they did. And during COVID, we discussed that at length. And now I want to go to the UK. Actor David Tennant, he was Doctor Who once apparently. He won a Celebrity Ally Award at the British LGBT Awards. I didn't know there was a British LGBT Awards, but here we go. And during his acceptance speech, he decided to attack the only black female in government by saying he wished Kemi Badenoch would shut up and no longer exist.
However, until we wake up and Kemi Badenoch doesn't exist anymore, I don't wish ill of her, I just wish her to shut up.
Douglas, even Keir Starmer has sought to distance himself from that ugly misogyny, but David Tennant has plenty of fans in the media, plenty more among the celebrity and activist class. What do you make of that entire saga?
You know, this is the absolute death of this so-called LGBT movement. There was a gay rights movement. It did a lot of good work, and it's basically done. But there are these weird people who keep on extending the alphabet and trying to keep themselves in work and setting up crock award ceremonies. I never heard of this thing, the LGBT awards. Look at that ugly monstrosity he was holding in his hands, this LGBT thing. Who the hell gives these awards away? Who's the big gay board that convenes and decides that the straight David Tennant should be given an LGBT award because of his advocacy of mutilating children? I mean, the whole thing's preposterous. Of course, it's sponsored by all of the sort of, Tesco and various other supermarkets and banks and all the high street chains that are meant to just actually, provide their services and in actual fact get sort of blackmailed into sponsoring things like this clownish ceremony that David Tennant was speaking at. But this is the end point of the LGBTQIA plus stupidity, is an actor who thinks he's right on and loving and kindness and all just about that, saying, whilst he accepts an honorary gay award for advocating gender transformation of confused children, calling for a black woman to shut up or disappear. And it's another one like the performative caring, Rita. It's another one just like that. It turns out that under the guise of so-called pride, people like David Tennant feel they can be as prejudiced as they want.
And he talked during that acceptance speech at length about empathy and decency and getting the wise counsel of his wife and forming these positions that are just common sense. And you listen to that entire speech he gave, Douglas, and it is so divorced from reality, because at the heart of it, one of the things that he advocates for is the medical intervention for confused children. So we're talking about irreversible treatments, sometimes even surgeries for which even the NHS has now said they're not going to participate in, and yet we've still got the activist class pushing this as if it's the only progressive way forward.
Absolutely, and listen, Rita, and everyone watching, listen again to the audience reaction when this straight bigot who is hiding behind medicalizing and sterilizing children as his reason for being kind and nice. Listen to the audience reaction as he engages in that. They all whoop and cheer. They love it. To hell with these people. To hell with them. Anyone who stands up and says, maybe we should pause before chopping off the private parts of healthy kids. Anyone who says maybe we should pause before that isn't a bigot, shouldn't shut up. They should speak up more. It's David Tennant and that audience that are the bigots, and history will judge them incredibly badly. And I can tell you one reason why. I'll be one of the ones that will write their history.
That is good to hear. Now, the state of Victoria, where we are, is about to introduce pill testing. This is a policy that has been trialled elsewhere as illicit drugs become decriminalised in some jurisdictions around the world. And there is at least a more permissive attitude here and elsewhere to drugs. You've researched this extensively. You've shot a documentary on America's drug crisis. Is Victoria doing the right thing by testing pills at places like music festivals, or can that be a slippery road to what we've seen in parts of the US now, where this issue is just out of control?
It's a really tricky one, Rita, because there are arguments for both sides. There's an argument to say that if the illegal drug supply has been contaminated with extremely dangerous, even more dangerous drugs than the drugs in question, if the drug supply has been contaminated, perhaps you should do whatever you can to make sure that there is what is called safe supply. On the other hand, there's absolutely no doubt that when you do this, you definitely give an incentive to people to say, well, I've tested the drugs and they're, as it were, safe. This is really, really dangerous territory. I'm very, very torn about this, as I say in my documentary. I do believe that just say no thing has fallen apart. And one of the reasons it's fallen apart is because a lot of the boomer generation doesn't realize when they talk about safe supply and so on, when they talk about testing, we are talking about a strength of illegal drug these days far, far beyond the toke of marijuana that they did in the 1960s or 70s. Even the marijuana supply in every country is vastly stronger than it was some years ago. So I really think that there is a deep misunderstanding, an intergenerational misunderstanding about what's going on here. I think on the one hand, you say, look, we want as few drug fatalities as possible at a music festival or anywhere else, but also to say, that doesn't mean this is safe. It's not. And it's never going to be.
Well, there's this theory that this will reduce drug use, and I don't know how that conclusion can be made by politicians.
That's one thing
well,
it absolutely doesn't do. No, it doesn't ever diminish.
Absolutely. I think
encourage it.
Well, I just wish they would be honest about that. They'd say this will save lives, but it may lead to increased drug use. But they always try to actually hide what is happening. Now, before you go, this is a shocking story out of Pakistan. I'm not going to show the footage. It is just too terrible. We have a mob of enraged Pakistanis who lynched and burnt a tourist who was accused of blasphemy. This happened last week. The man was being held at a police station in the country's northwest after he was accused of desecrating a copy of the Quran in his hotel room, but the police couldn't or wouldn't protect him, and the mob dragged him away and brutally murdered him. Douglas, this isn't an isolated case. Christians are not safe in Pakistan. Just the mere mention of blasphemy can land you in jail or worse, lynched by an enraged Islamist mob.
Absolutely. And keep a close eye in the coming days on what leaders in Pakistan, both religious and political, say about this incident and whether the police arrest any or all of the people engaged in it. I bet you'll see a stunning silence. And people should remember this. In countries like Australia, Britain, America, Canada, we take freedom of belief, freedom of expression for granted. In fact, so much for granted that many people in our society aren't even willing to fight for it. Meanwhile, in a country like Pakistan, which has got so many disastrous problems and is such an unstable country and is doing so many atrocious things in the realm of human rights. Just look at how in a place like that, as you say, Rita, a mob can be inflamed to murder any moment for stupid things like a rumor that somebody's molested a book. I mean, the whole thing is so tragic and preposterous and should be a reminder to us how lucky we are in our own countries in the West. But the fact that it's not luck, it's because people stand up and fight for these freedoms and for these rights. And if you don't, you'll lose them. And there's every possibility that in the years ahead, countries like ours can revert back to the situation that Pakistan is in today. And I hope very much that they don't, but this should be a warning to us in the West.
Oh, absolutely. And I said it's not isolated. There was a Christian just a couple of weeks ago who, again, was accused of blasphemy, whether they even were guilty of it. They were murdered. A Christian community was attacked last month over similar allegations. And Pakistan carries the death penalty for blasphemy. So
Yes.
if the enraged mob don't get you, the authorities might.
And absolutely, just one other thing on that. People should remember how incredibly fragile does your so-called belief system or religion have to be? How fragile, how delicate, how dainty that one person rumored to touch up a book in the wrong way is some kind of outrage which will lead you to murder. Anyone who thinks that there's some kind of compromise with people who believe that or think that or follow that should just think about that for a while. As you say, Rita, this is not just a public that believes this. It's a political class that advocates it as well, and a clerical class that does as well. And I do wish that all those human rights, the people who talk about human rights in the West, cared a damn or ever spoke up for the rights of a Christian or anyone else, not to have false rumors flung around them and then to be murdered by a mad Islamic mob.
Well, because this murder was filmed by so many, there were dozens of mobile phones out. The police have made some arrests. We'll follow through and see if there's actually prosecutions or any actions there. But I've covered and written about this for some time, and we've got to open our eyes to what's happening. And I think there's just so much ignorance and naivety in the West.
Yes.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
It's a great pleasure as always. Thank you.